This amendment requires that a civics class would be taught to exclusively juniors and seniors during their 11th and 12th grade years. I'm sure many of you have gotten calls from your own constituents asking about federal legislation. This is not their own fault, but rather our fault as a state for not properly educating them about the importance of our own state government. Currently, our state does have civics requirements embedded into its academic standards. If a school district does not want to require a full class on government, they can weave and work the current requirements into other classes. I would argue that this does not go far enough. Government has become more and more complex over the years, and a dedicated course is required to provide for an engaged and enlightened citizenry. Justice Paul Anderson of the Minnesota State Supreme Court has said, civics education currently suffers from malnutrition, and we need to restore it to its health. Proper civics education is a key ingredient to our state's future. In fact, I would add to our country's future. We need educated citizens if we want to continue to live in a democratic society that cherishes and protects life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson, Justice Anderson continues to say, recognized this point when he said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what has never been. Jefferson understood the importance of an informed citizen. The pivotal difference in this amendment is the requirement that the class is taught in 11th and 12th grade. As a retired government teacher, I totally get the idea that in 9th grade, when it's taught in many schools, just doesn't cut it. Once students get their driver's license, once students start engaged in voting, once students register for selective service, once students start paying their income and their sales and their gas taxes, once students are on their path towards their career, that is when we need to be teaching a course in American government. There is much more required of a citizen than basic knowledge and another test. We need to create critical thinkers, the engaged and enlightened citizenry that our state constitution demands. We want our children to go and become election judges. We want them to write letters. We want them to attend our civic meetings and town halls. And yes, members, we'd love for them to show up in our offices. The greatest menace to freedom is a disinterested and disengaged citizenry. Political efficacy and a civic virtue and civic engagement is a lifetime habit that can begin when the children are in our classrooms. The Constitution begins with the words, "we the people," in order to form a more perfect union. It is extremely hard for us to make it more perfect when we just don't know how. If we lack the tools, if we lack the rules, if we lack the basic concepts of the who, what, where, when, and why, of how this whole process works, and sometimes doesn't. In order to become a U.S. citizen, we require these new immigrants to take a citizenship test. They should look to our students as role models of how to do well on that test. The state legislature not only has a constitutional duty to require a civics class, but we have a moral responsibility as well. As I said, creating an informed citizenry is not just the right thing to do, it's in our state constitution in Article 13, which says, and I alluded to it last night, the stability of a Republican form of government, dependent mainly upon the intelligence of the people. It is the duty of the legislature to establish this concept called public schools. There's been a lot of concern about this bill, that it's a mandate upon the schools. This bill, Senate File 7, has 16 mandates already in it. Some people argue this is a challenge to the districts. This is no challenge. There's no fiscal, what's the concept, fiscal note to this bill. The 3.5 credits required in social studies is already mandated. This would just say one of them should have to be in this class that we're mandated to already offer under the state constitution. Some would argue students should have flexibility in their electives and more choices. Well, I would argue with anybody, it's not a choice. This is not an option. This is a requirement in a democracy. After signing the U.S. Constitution, Dr. Franklin walks out the hall of the Constitutional Convention, and a bunch of farmers were ready to greet him. And they said to him, Dr. Franklin, after 3 weeks of complete secrecy, you left us in the dark. What were you writing in there? What kind of government are you bestowing upon us? And his response was, a republic, if you can keep it. That's why I want government required for our juniors or seniors in high school.